Welcome back. Our next guest is Robert Greenwald. You probably know him as an innovative activist, a media activist. He basically invented the nonprofit model of creating these documentary films and then self-distributing, but then also gathering people in house parties to watch them and to engage in activism based on them. It's something that nobody had done before Robert Greenwald had done it. Robert Greenwald, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk about this Murdoch hacking scandal. Robert is the director of Outfox, the great documentary about how Fox is essentially a propaganda tool posing as a media company. And I want to talk about this News Corp hacking scandal. Can you first just give us a brief overview? Because I don't think that the American media has given this issue a lot of play.
Well, the overview is that the various Murdoch newspapers in London have been hacking in to a variety of people's home phones, celebrities, people who are innocent and who are in the news, most infamously the young girl who was killed. They hacked into her phone, her answering machine, to the point where her parents actually thought she was alive because some of the messages had been erased.
That's a young girl named Millie Dowler.
Yes. And it turns out the messages had been erased by some Murdoch hackers who were unhappy, get this, that her answering machine was filled up. So they wanted to create space on the answering machine. So it's been long-term. It's just been systemic. It's been enormous sums of money paid to these people initially to do the hacking and then ultimately to silence them and to settle legal claims.
Now, the first that we heard of this was way back in 2007 when a News of the World reporter and a private investigator were convicted of phone hacking. And it definitely flew under the radar. News Corp said it was an isolated incident. And then in 2009, more victims started to come forward and say that they were hacked. But this still did not become a big story until 2011. Was it just Millie Dowler that made this explode into a huge scandal in the UK?
Yes, it was exactly that. Up until then, it seemed like, first of all, as you say, an isolated incident. It seemed to be the rotten apple theory, which, by the way, is, I think, something important for progressives to talk about. Every time there's a problem, a corporate problem of some kinds, it's always a rotten apple. When it's perceived as a progressive problem, the right has actually been very smart and very effective as painting it as systemic and widespread. But yes, up until the Millie Dowling incident, people ignored it. It seemed that it was essentially reporters hacking into celebrities' phones to get information, and it therefore seemed fairly harmless.
Okay, so Reuters says, and I quote, "The scandal has raised questions about ties between reporters and police officers, some of whom are alleged to have provided confidential telephone numbers and other information to journalists." Tell me what's going on with the the British police. Are they complicit in this? And how does this tell us? What does this tell us about the Murdoch's reach?
Well, the British police are definitely more than complicit. They've been co-partners. Murdoch has hired some of the policemen. There's been a whole connection between the Murdoch empire, some of his reporters and top editors, the police. There was an initial investigation done that basically cleared the Murdoch folks, and it was because, in many ways, that they're working hand in hand. But what it points out is the important fact, first of all, we really don't even fully understand it here, how much incredible power he has over there, or had, because of the newspapers, the fear that people had to go against him, and the way he used the newspapers to threaten, intimidate, cajole everybody, and most importantly, political leaders.
Even Prime Minister David Cameron had close links to News Corp, didn't he?
Especially, yes. No question. And Murdoch, I think, was there visiting him the day after he was elected. And to his, eternal shame, he has been a big part of increasing their power. because politics is a lot of based around power, perceived power, who can do what to whom. And Murdoch has often bought, purchased, and used newspapers, even though from a financial point of view, given the size of his empire, they're not justified on an economic basis. But what he's been smart enough to do is use them, even though maybe they don't make huge sums of money the way a cable station might. He uses them to beat up political people who then help pass legislation that then removes any regulation and allows his empire to expand in all kinds of ways. And it's all very legal other than the hacking part, by the way. But the use of newspapers, the use of media, the use of Fox News, the use of all his media outlets over here to attack politicians blatantly, openly, and shamelessly when they go against his economic self-interest, well, reminds me a lot of the Koch brothers.
Or Berlusconi in Italy.
Yes.
Now, in 2011, News of the World went down in flames. And since then, there have been some very big names dragged through inquiries in the UK and in some cases arrested. Tell me where the status of where do things stand today?
Well, there was a whole series of new indictments coming down. An additional group of reporters have been cited and are being brought in for questioning. And then, of course, James Murdoch was forced to resign as somebody said online, I can't remember who it was, he was resigning so he could spend less time with his family. Great quote. But it seems that very clear that it's expanding, that Murdoch went over there to try to save the day. Some of the reporters, in a misguided and unfortunate effort to protect their turf, have banded together and are saying, oh, it's bad, it's a witch hunt. But in fact, this is a long time coming. And again, it's an absolute, I mean, the individuals are sad or not sad. Many of them are, many of those whose wires were tapped were getting sums of money as payoff. But what's important is for us who believe in democracy, who believe in media, need to look at how Murdoch has, again, over and over again, used the media to advance narrow economic and ideological interests.
And that's as true here in the United States with Fox News and the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal as it is in the UK.
Totally. And he's never called out about it. When you see something in the Post, when you see something in the Journal, which, an op-ed or a piece of so-called journalism, or you see it on Fox News over and over again, it's advocacy for his economic self-interest. There's no accountability, and there's no one saying, wait a minute, this institution is taking positions that advance the interests of the owner, period. Now, they're certainly entitled to do that, but damn it, we're also entitled to know about it.
And we're entitled to not call them a news organization. Before I get to that, because I want to actually dig into that a little bit more, Robert, what does sensitive British heartthrob Hugh Grant have to do with all of this?
He was very sensitive.
He's sensitive.
Yes.
Don't hurt his feelings.
Actually made a television movie with him years ago when I was still doing commercial film and TV work before I moved over to the brave new film stuff. So I have a soft spot in my heart for him. What it was is his phone was hacked also. Again, there were a series of celebrities. I don't have the full list in front of me. There were a series of anybody high profile that had either something in the news, a scandal, a love affair, a breakup, a marriage dissolving over and over again. I mean, they hacked huge numbers of people. The notion that it was a rogue person is, of course, unacceptable. And just like most of the worst scandals, it's the cover-up that brings them down. It's the lying, it's the cheating, it's the saying this didn't happen that gets them caught. And that's what's going to do in a large number of these women and men. But
Hugh Grant actually did a yeoman's job in exposing this.
Yes, he did.
And here's what strikes me as so interesting and something that we should talk about is that here we have a huge, enormous scandal. And it has one of the major media figures in the United States involved, Rupert Murdoch, and his company. It even has a celebrity like Hugh Grant, who we gave an enormous amount of coverage to when he was caught in flagrante delicto with a prostitute. And yet, despite all of that, despite the fact that this should be, by the usual media standards, a gigantic story, on the front page, it seems to me, and maybe you'll disagree, that the American media have basically relegated this story to page B17 beneath the fold. It's not a big story here at all. What do you make of that? I mean, how can we explain this disconnect between the gravity of this story in the UK and the way that the US media has given it short shrift?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think, first of all, it has gotten more coverage than that, at least for a while. Certainly when Murdoch testified and James testified, it was pretty close to either front page or third page and was pretty big news. But I think you just said a key thing. Why have they not covered the gravity of this story? Well, this goes to the work that many of our good friends do around media, and why we're fortunate to have you and AlterNet to create an alternative voice, is the gravity issues are not covered. But sadly, because news is required to be a profit center, the same way reality TV is or gossip TV for these large corporations, it goes to the lowest common denominator. Gravity is not perceived as what people want in the largest numbers versus Lindsay Lohan. And so the gravity issues, be it this, which raises a lot of questions, even when it's covered, the basic issues are not covered about the nature of media. But, we worked on the Afghanistan war for 2 years. You could barely get any coverage on that. We've been working on the Koch brothers. We have our film coming out. We couldn't get anything on that for a year until the president, went after them. So it's a bigger problem than Murdoch, and it's one that we who work in independent media, alternative media, need to address on a daily basis, which is how do we bring out these issues of gravity without making people feel suicidal or just want to, in despair, but how do we talk about them in substantive, interesting ways?
Now, I want to kind of stay on the topic of Fox while we're discussing the Murdoch empire. Let's talk about the memos that were at the heart of your film Outfoxed. Remind our listeners of what you found when you dug into these internal memos.
Well, when we began, or when we were about midway through the research on Outfoxed, and again, it was take you back to before we did the film. Fox was perceived, including by many of our good liberal friends and organizations, they're not so bad. They just have an occasional right-wing pundit on. But clearly the pundit is separate from the news division, and the news division is reasonable. So the beauty about Fox was, because of the technology and because of the amazing volunteers we had around the country, they were able to, under our guidance and the professional editing staff, we were able to show, no, in fact, it's not once, but it's ongoing and it's constant. In the course of the research, as I was spreading word and getting a couple of former employees to work at Fox, I remember getting a very cryptic email, and this person said, contact me. So I called this person, met, I don't even want to specify gender, and there was a briefcase or a file folder. It was given to me and said, this will be very helpful. And I remember it was in Manhattan in a hotel lobby, just like in the movies. I went back to my hotel, I looked at it, and there were these memos literally telling the people how to cover the news. And
this isn't the evening opinion people. This is the hard news people during the day.
Absolutely. And in the film, which is, I'm sure, available online, and clips are available, and we followed up with a series of Fox attacks. I mean, it would tell you exactly that. It would tell the news people. One of the worst ones was about, because they were in favor of the Iraq war, was don't moan for the victims of the Iraq war. I mean, literally. There was stuff about how to cover the opening of, I think it was the Reagan Library. And we have some clips showing that nobody showed up and Fox said it was this great success. We have the Bill O'Reilly intimidating Jeremy, whose father had been killed in 9/11, and Bill O'Reilly telling him, you should be ashamed of yourself. And then we got an interview with Jeremy. But as you rightfully say, Joshua, at the core were these memos telling people how to cover the news with a political bias. Now, today, it's not even necessary because anybody who works there knows what's expected. Back then, maybe they needed a little bit more remedial guidance.
You know, it strikes me as a great irony that the mainstream media treats Fox as if, in a collegial way, as if they are a news gathering organization, when you've so clearly demonstrated the way that they shadow the news coverage, and in a way that's very, very different from, everybody has biases. Obviously, it's impossible to be a human being and not have various biases. But it seems to me that the commercial media plays along with this fiction that Fox is a legitimate news organization.
Well, they do. And when we released that Fox and we got a lot of press attention, one of the things that I understood only later was it allowed commercial media to talk about a so-called competitor. Because if you're CNN or you're the Associated Press, even the New York Times, back then they didn't feel comfortable they could talk about somebody who they were competing with from a, quote, critical point of view. So they all used the movie as the opening gamut. And now, of course, you do have journalists who go after them regularly, and we're to the point it's old news and nobody expects anything different. Everyone knows that they're biased now, and it's not even a question, which was the goal of the film. It wasn't to get people to stop watching Fox, because that wasn't going to happen, but it was to affect the media and affect everybody else to know that Fox has a strong ideological bias. That's who they are.
Robert Greenwald, thank you so much for joining us. We're about out of time. I hope everybody stays with us. We're going to be right back. My next guest is Sarah Jaffe.